Hey BookTube, welcome back to Barter Hordes. My name is Robert. Happy Friday. It's been a really good but busy week for me. The BookTube Prize is up and running for season 3. The judges now have their assignments and they've started reading for the first round. So now we go kind of quiet for 6 to 8 weeks as the judges finish up their reading, and then at the end of March we'll cut the field in half and move on. I have been reading pretty consistently. I finished 3 books this week. I'll talk about those in just a second. For those of you who follow my Instagram, especially my stories, you've been seeing my bicycle riding. I've been riding since the beginning of January again after a long layoff to heal a back injury. I did not ride yesterday, and I think I missed 1 day in January, so I've been pretty consistent riding virtually every day, but every once in a while my legs just feel dead, and so I took yesterday off. I have been busy with some Zoom job interviews. I'm not entirely sure I'm coming out of retirement, but I've been tempted by a position opening that I'll tell you about more later. I'm still in the process. I'm not sure for me personally if this is the right time to be entering the labor force again, given COVID. Even with the vaccine out there, all it takes is one mistake for me to be in a really bad situation with my health status, and for a job I don't have to take. I'm not sure it's the right time to take a job, but it's a really interesting job to me, and so I'm considering it. I'll know more about that in the next week or two. And I have relaunched my K-drama watching, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So let's get to the books first. I finished 3 books this week. 2 were fiction, 1 was nonfiction. The first one I finished is a novel called Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I read Lily King's Euphoria several years ago when it first came out, and while I don't remember a lot of the details about it, I remember really enjoying it and thinking it was very well done. So I had a pretty high set of expectations going into this one, especially because it's received a lot of really positive reviews from the critics. I do find it really interesting, though, going back and looking at the reviews, that the critics that were less positive about this book tended to be UK critics, whereas the American critics, especially younger outlets, really praise this book. And I find myself kind of on the fence. There are some things about this book that I really enjoyed, some things about this book that I didn't think worked very well for me. And some of it may just be my personal taste, and some of it may be just, I don't think it's as good as Euphoria. But it's the story of a young woman named Casey, who is a novelist. Most of her friends who wanted to be writers have given up and gone into the corporate world or whatever, but she's sticking it out. She's 31 at the time of the novel. She's living in Boston, Cambridge, the Harvard area. She works at a very upscale, almost private restaurant called Iris as a waitress to help make ends meet. She lives in a terrible place. She's got tons of student debt, as you can imagine, and she's stuck. She hasn't been able to write on her book. And the problem I had is that the portrayal of writers in this book is this tortured artist syndrome, where every single writer that she hangs out with, and for the most part, that's all she does is hang out with other writers. They're all these pretentious, narcissistic blowhards that are really hard to care about. And then even the crowd of people she works with at Iris, these arrested development types, as I called them in my Goodreads review, it's just a cast of insufferable people. And so it's really more difficult for me to get into. But one of the things that I have a problem with thematically is that Casey's 31. her mom abandoned her when she was a child, left her dad and her, and ran off with a guitar player. So she's been without her mom for most of her life. And now her mom, in her 50s, has died of cancer, and Casey's 31. But the level of grief she's experiencing just seems inordinate compared to how little this woman has been a part of her life. She's completely paralyzed and devastated and crippled by this grief, and it just doesn't ring true to me. I know there are people who grieve much more than other people, but grieving somebody this desperately who hasn't been a part of your life for so long just rings a little bit false to me. And so Casey spends her whole life looking backwards instead of dealing with the present. So that bothered me. That may just be a personal beef that I have with that kind of backward looking person who forgets that the present and the future matter because all they can see is the past. I just didn't think it was justified based on the story. Losing her mother who's in her 50s when her mother hasn't been a part of her life for most of her life. That just didn't ring true to me. The other thing that didn't ring true to me is the ending. It's a very happy ending, and I'm all for happy endings. I love positive books, but this one just seemed too easy and too pat after all the misery for the first, I don't know, 275 pages, for the last 25 pages suddenly to be such a Hollywood ending. I don't know, it seemed too pat, too easy for me. So I have mixed feelings about this one, even though I know a lot of the reviewers and a lot of the readers on BookTube have really loved it. The second book I read, however, I absolutely adored, and this is a nonfiction work. It's a collection of essays called World of Wonders, and I'm going to try to get the author's name right. Her name is Aimee Nezhukumatathil. She is a creative writing professor at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. She comes from a background where her father is from India, her mother is from, I want to say, the Philippines. And so growing up in the United States with mixed parents and in several areas where she was the only person of color in her class was difficult and challenging. And so she felt like a little bit of an outsider. But this series of essays and the wonderful illustrations that accompany them, it's a brief series, are just gorgeously written. They're very short essays. Each one takes some aspect of the natural world, either a plant or an animal or something in the natural world, and then the author links it to a remembrance of something in her own life or an aspect of her own life, not in a narcissistic way, but it just reminds her of something in her own life. And these are just the most wonderful personal essays. These are the kind of essays I wish more essayists would write. Things that teach us about them and how they interact with the world. And the wonder that she has for the natural world, I think, is so refreshing. And I can only imagine how positive she would be as a writing teacher at the university level. I would love to have her as a professor of writing that in a class I was taking. So I really strongly recommend this collection of essays. And I read this one fairly slowly because they're all similar in style and format, although each one's about a different aspect of the natural world and a different aspect of her own life. And you don't want to breeze through them too quickly because they are so pretty. They are so beautiful. And so I would read one or two and then put it down and do something else, then come back and pick it up later in the day. The third book I finished is brand new. It came out in 2021. It's called Trio by William Boyd. William Boyd was born in Ghana and grew up in Ghana and Nigeria, but I believe he's lived in London and Paris for most of his adult life, and he sounds and writes with a very British-seeming voice to me. Having read a lot of British fiction, he fits right in that British tradition. So I don't see him necessarily as an African writer, even though he was born there. Trio is a book set in 1968. So, of course, it's at a time of great upheaval in the world between Vietnam and the sexual revolution and just everything going on in the world. The the protests, the riots in Paris, everything. The book focuses on three characters who are interlinked in some kind of tangential ways. The first character, Annie, is an American actress of some name, and she's working on a film in Brighton, England. She has an ex-husband she was only married to for a couple of months who has turned out to be a terrorist and is on the run from the FBI. She has a boyfriend who is a French philosopher who lives in Paris and has been very active in the movement in France. And so she's got these weird political ties through her romantic liaisons, although she's not necessarily a political figure. The producer of that same film is a closeted gay man who's probably in his early 60s. He's married, has kids, and he's not very happy about his career. He's not very happy about his personal life because it's the 1960s. It's very difficult to come out in the 1960s in England. And so he hasn't. And so he is kind of living a dual life, and it's taking its toll on him. And then the third character is a woman novelist who is an alcoholic. She hasn't published anything in over a decade. And she has been labeled the new Virginia Woolf, a label which she despises because she doesn't particularly like Virginia Woolf's novels, and she doesn't really see any of Virginia Woolf's writing characteristics in her own works. But she starts to become obsessed with Virginia Woolf and decides she's going to make her comeback by writing a novel about the final day when Virginia Woolf takes her own life by walking into the River Ouse. She can't get past the first paragraph, though. She rewrites the first paragraph a dozen times, and that's as far as she gets. And so she is also married to the director of this movie film. So all these people run in the same circles, although they're not directly related to each other. It's kind of a dark comic farce. It's grim at times, but it's also funny at times, and it's satirical about society and about the culture that these people are all involved in making films and writing books and so on. And I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but I did like it. It is a pretty quick read. I managed to get through it very quickly. And I've read some William Boyd before, a long time ago, but it's been a long time. He came out with one a year or two ago called Love is Blind that I have a copy of, but I never have picked up, so I might have to pick that one up too. But anyway, I liked it. It just didn't blow my socks off. So what am I reading now? I have been reading this History of Korea book forever, and I have 2 short chapters left of that, so I'm going to make an effort to try to knock that out this week. I was reading a chapter a night for a while, but then I stopped reading at night because I was going to bed so incredibly late, and I just couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. And so I brought it downstairs. It's off my night table now, and I'm going to try to read the last 2 chapters of it this coming week and get this one off my nightstand, because there's one I want to put on my nightstand to replace it, which I'll talk about next week once I start reading it. The other book that I'm reading that I'm almost finished with, it's so fast of a read, is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. Those of you who read her, is it Station 11 years ago probably know her already. And I won't talk about this one now, although it's just a really fast, compelling read. And the other book that I'm reading is all Rick's fault. Rick McDonnell did the BookTube spin. And for those of you who don't know what that is, each of us who participated made a list of 20 books that we wanted to read from our TBRs. We numbered them 1 to 20. And then at the end of January, Rick did a random spin on his channel, and the number 15 came up. So whatever number 15 was on your list, you're supposed to read that in February and March. Number 15 on my list was a massive, and by massive I mean huge, biography of Mozart. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you know that I'm a former classical musician. I love classical music. So I thought, okay, I'll take this sucker on. And so I'm reading 50 pages a day of this. The book is 750 pages of actual text before you get to the appendix and the notes and everything else. So it's going to take me 2 weeks to read this thing. And the print is small, so 50 pages takes a while to get through each day. But it's really good. I'm enjoying it. One of the things that it's doing, and I'll talk about it more after I finish it, is it's countering a lot of the myths that have grown up around the life of Mozart. I love the film Amadeus, but it buys into all the myths. And so this book is trying to it's becoming, from the reviewer's point of view, I think it's becoming the definitive biography of Mozart. And so it's a little bit more factual than the myths surrounding him. Okay, so that's what I've been reading. I had been on hiatus from my K-dramas for a little while between the election and then the drama at the Capitol and just everything going on, the inauguration. I just got out of the habit of watching K-dramas at night for several weeks, but I've started back again. I started to watch one called The Legend of the Blue Sea, which I mentioned on this channel last week. It's a mermaid out of water story. But I've only seen the first episode of that one because the K-drama appreciation group that I am in, all of us kind of felt the same way, that it was time to get back to watching K-dramas. We've been kind of out of the habit of doing that for a while. And so we decided to watch another one together. We were get in the habit of watching one a month where we would watch them as a group, one episode a day, and then we would comment to each other on Voxer. We started doing that again this week with Startup, which is a relatively new one on Netflix. So if you get Netflix, it's one that you can watch now. We've seen the first 3 episodes, so we're still in the first quarter of the show, but all of us seem to really be positive about this one. I think it's off to a great start. It is about the main character is a young woman. Her father was fed up in the corporate world and had an idea for a startup, and he wanted to quit his job and pursue his dream. And his wife was much more practical than he was, but also much more rigid than he was. And she said, if you do this, I'm divorcing you. I'm leaving you. I can't be that poor with 2 daughters. And so he decides to quit one day, and they divorce, and they make the kids decide who they're going to live with. And the older sister goes with the mother. The younger daughter, the main character, goes with the father. That's all in the first episode. I'm not giving too much away. And then tragedy happens in the family, and the girl struggles. She just struggles. And it's also around the corporate startup culture. There's kind of a startup hotbox. It's called Sandbox, if you will, a way of getting these people started. And the people involved in the various startups interweave each other's lives in really interesting ways. And of course, there's a romance involved too, but it's a confusing romance. You're not really sure who's going to be the romantic characters for a while. But the writing is good. The directing has been brilliant. Unlike a lot of K-dramas that split up the backstory and give you little hints of things throughout 15 episodes, this one seems to give you a lot of the backstory in the very first episode, which I really appreciated because now I understand the motivations and the actions of a lot of the characters in the current time period. So that's what we're watching. We're going to watch 1 episode a day for roughly 2 weeks, and then we'll finish that one up, and then I'll probably go back and pick up The Legend of the Blue Sea again. So that one's called Startup. So that's what I've been reading. That's what I've been watching. I haven't watched any movies recently. I've been listening to some classical music. I've been listening to a lot of Mozart while I'm reading the Mozart biography. Not necessarily new recordings of Mozart, but ones that I already have in my library. For the first several days, I've been listening to the complete collection of Mozart's piano concertos performed by Muriel, who's just a brilliant pianist for Mozart. He does all of the concertos on a single recording. So I've been listening to that. And when that finishes up, I'll still have a lot of the book left to go. So I'll switch over to his other concertos, violin and other concertos, and then his symphonies. On my freshman recital in college, I played the Mozart bassoon concerto, except I did it on euphonium. Euphoniums have to steal from everywhere. We steal from cello, we steal from bassoon, we steal all sorts of things. But that's one that's in a good range for euphonium and was one of my favorite pieces to learn and to perform. So I'm very fond of Mozart in a lot of ways. And so this has been a good dual experience, listening to some of his music again while I'm reading about his early life. I'm still in his teenage years. He's just now getting to the end of his teenage years in the part that I'm reading. So that's what I've been up to. I hope you have a great weekend coming ahead. Please stay safe. We're not out of the woods by any means yet. And I'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.